I've not slept for a long while, and I know you won't leave until you get what you've come for.
Hello and welcome to my Bleak Faith Forsaken Console Edition game review. An honest review from a game that I actually really enjoyed, despite its really bumpy launch and a lot of bad reviews out there negatively. I really enjoyed it, and I wanted to give a quick review to everybody who maybe is sitting on the fence and wondering if it's worth their time. This game is a flawed but ultimately very enjoyable love letter to FromSoft's Souls series. It's still rough around the edges, and it's definitely an indie game, but after a terrible launch on PC, it was continuously updated and improved to the point where its flaws are ultimately mostly forgiven.
Back so soon?
This crusade is not only about the city. Yaroslav is to be apprehended.
Because what we have is a game that favors exploration, atmosphere, solid combat, lots of stat variety building, and mixes in probably one of the best soundtracks I think I've heard in years. It has a lot of things that you've seen other places, maybe not as good as some other places, but it also has some new ideas that carve out some interesting and unique mechanics. Let's start where it's not your standard Souls-like. First off, you do not lose experience. When you die, you just die. You keep your experience, you can keep leveling up, you can keep getting stronger, but there is a cap. They've capped the level of your first playthrough at 25 levels, so you can't just get stronger and stronger forever. That changes from your standard Souls-like, where when you die you lose everything, and part of the stress of a Souls game, especially like Dark Souls, is holding on to that life so you can get back to rest and level up. With that taken off your shoulders, it does make it a little bit, I'd say, on the Souls-light genre. But that being said, you can turn it off if you're a purist. There's everything from perks and settings to make it harder, as well as even a ring I found early in the game that I didn't realize I was wearing that stops you from actually getting experience points. You also don't get infinite health flasks. Like all other Souls games, every time you have a health flask, you get more and more as you get stronger and explore, and you rest and they refill. Bleak Faith doesn't have that. What they have instead is a crafting mechanic and a set number of things you can hold at a time. When you're not in battle, they refill, and you have to keep recrafting them from elements you find around the world. That means when you're fighting a boss, what you bring in is what you get. So if you can only hold 3 or 4 in your character, and you have 3 or 4, when you've used them all up, that's it. Which still does keep that same sort of Souls boss-like feel of running out of health, panicking at the end, and barely squeaking by. Those are really the only 2 big deviations, I think, for a Souls game, which kind of takes this into a bit of the dungeon crawler action RPG. Like every Souls game, you have a resting point, they called homunculus in this game. They're these little creeping floating figures that represent the game's fast travel and rest points, and they reset enemies, as you would expect. You can apply levels, you can apply permanent perks, abilities to create an ideal build with some pretty diverse builds. Everything from magic to strength to stamina, and a few more interesting ones. For example, on my build for my first playthrough, I did what was called a leech build, where my character would take life and take stamina from every hit that they put onto an enemy. Essentially taking you into a tank that you can face tank a lot of things. There's even a solid parry system. Similar to, say, a Sekiro, you can just spam the parry button if you're struggling and then hit back. And then there's some additional things you can do with that so that you can parry someone and then do, say, a hard attack, and that hard attack hits harder. So you can do some more with some of the perks to improve that parry. But the biggest Souls connection I found was the undeniable world design. It's interconnected, there's lifts, but it's at a massive scale. Things are connected from door to door, lift to lift. You double back and find new ways, a lot of hidden areas, and a whole lot of grandeur and atmosphere. And like I said off the top, probably the best soundtrack I've heard all year in a game. You have 3 sets of armor classes, light, medium, and heavy. And what makes these really unique in this game is it's not about finding the best armor. It's about what you put into the armor. All the armor and weapon are upgradable up to 5 levels. You can only upgrade them as you find what's called echoes around the game. That's a character that is at your rest points will help you upgrade. And then you put different crystals into those upgrades to change things about how your weapon hits, how hard it hits, how strong you are, and those increase based on percentage. And that's really, I think, the core of the system, beyond just leveling up. If you don't invest time in upgrading your equipment, you're going to struggle. But once you get it, it creates some really interesting builds. In total, there are less than a dozen bosses, but they're all well designed and unique, I'd say, except for one of them. One was a bit of a gimmicky boss in the desert. And for the most part, as long as you can handle the chaos that happens in the latter phases of the match, they're pretty enjoyable. Some of them are fantastic, and some took me a good hour to beat. Other ones were pretty quick and easy. Now, outside of bosses, I'd say really the zones and the varied zones are your standard Souls-like zones. You have your initial zone with the crumbled castles and the cliffs, to the cement cyberpunk central zone that really connects most of the game. It's where most of the game branches off. You have your standard sewers with water and darkness. What's interesting in the sewers is it rains all the time, which added a nice sort of atmosphere and texture. You have towering zones with towers up in the clouds, filled with samurai, a flooded underwater city where you actually swim deeper and deeper, following red lights until getting to one of the game's ultimate 2 objectives, deserts, and a few other zones. Lots of variety. And what's great about all these places is I really love how much hidden things there are. You have hidden pathways, lots of loot, and because you don't lose your experience when you die, I found myself exploring a lot more. Climbing off the beaten path, finding different things, finding a different branch from the main path, and then I was able to die and come back to my starting zone without losing anything. You can place it once per rest at a normal rest point, and these are really great because this actually lets you do things like split your path. If the path has a left and a right and you're not sure, you can place this spawn point, take the left path, something happens and you die, you come back to that point, not all the way back to the beginning. You can also use them for things like really tricky jumps, jumping into certain areas, maybe trying to find a bit of shiny loot, or maybe after a really hard boss and you still haven't found the next checkpoint, the next rest point, and you're getting nervous, you can place it down so if you die, you start from there. And I really enjoyed that mechanic.
There's something in the air.
Overall, I think as a discount indie title, I think this is a game that really shows an impressive first try for a development team of 3 people. I know it came out with a lot of excitement and then instantly went off a cliff because it was not that good when it came out, had a lot of problems on PC, and a lot of reviews were really harsh on it. But I really wish those reviewers would actually take a crack at it now with the console edition. There are quite a lot of improvements. I think this is a game that's a must-play for any Dark Souls fan, maybe especially if you're someone who loved Elden Ring, but at the same time kind of felt it was just too big, too complex, and missed that intimate, cold, scary, empty, sort of dark feeling of the original Dark Souls games. No longer, I think, a failed masterpiece like when it came out. It's much more of, I'd say, a flawed but ultimately forgivable masterpiece. If you're more interested in the game, be sure to check out my full gameplay series that I have on YouTube, where I've gone through the entire first playthrough. There's no voiceover, but it can give you a good idea of what's in the game and where to go. Like I said, there's not a clear path in this one. There are no maps. You really have to find your way and explore. That's part of the joy of the game. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed the review. It's a quick review, an honest review. I really like this game. I'm actually working through my Platinum New Game Plus playthrough, and I hope you'll give it a shot. And a message to the developers: please give us Bleak Faith 2. I think it's worth everybody's time.
Well, well, you made it through.